Okay, today we're here to discuss the Battle of Munfordville, also known as the Battle of Green River or the Battle of the Bridge. The history of this area goes back to Civil War era of 1861, where just up the road from the bridge was a fight on Rowlett Station. This involved rebels who had attacked the 32nd Indiana Infantry. With me today is Pam Brooks. Her great-great-grandfather had taken part in this battle. But to give you a little bit of history of it, let's step back in time. The first thing you need to know is that the battle itself took place on September 14th of 1862 and it continued through the 17th. The bridge where it was fought at goes back to 1859. In 1859, Albert Fink built the 5 Fink Truss Bridge known as the Green River Bridge. The piers were built by John W. Key and his sons, and the stonemasons had quarried the rock from local limestone. The bridge is 1,800 foot long, and at the time of its building, it was the longest metal bridge in the United States. It would later be assumed to be the second largest metal bridge in the United States. In action on September 14th is Colonel John T. Wilder. He was a competent regimental commander and was commanding 3 regiments. He was joined by another native New Yorker in Cyrus L. Dunham. Dunham was a lawyer who moved to Salem, Indiana after passing the bar in 1941. He was a 3-time elected congressman for the state of Indiana, participated in the 31st, 32nd, and 33rd Congress. He was also the Secretary of State of Indiana by 1858. Wilder, on the other hand, was started a foundry and received many patents for his hydraulic machines. By 1859, he had created a patent, a unique water wheel. Following the war, Wilder would become mayor of Chattanooga. Fort Craig was built and was constructed in a star shape of wooden and earthen works just north of the Woodson homestead and close to a small cemetery. Not too far from the railroad depot. On the opposing side was Southern General James Chalmers and Major General Simon Boulevard Buckner. With them were the 7th, 9th, 10th, 29th, 44th Mississippi units, along with Richard Sharpshooters, 2 cannons of Ketchum's command, and 2 cannons of Garrity's command. And off to the reserves were 5 cannons of Scott's command. Buckner turned down a position of the Union Army after pushing for Kentucky's neutrality in the war. He later accepted a position in the CSA, but capitulated to U.S. Grant after losing at Fort Donelson. Buckner would become the 30th governor of Kentucky. Prior to arriving at the Green River along the L&M Railroad, Chalmers had received bad data on the situation in Munford. He believed there would be only 1,800 men, most believed to be new recruits. He was also under the impression that these forces were locked down with no help and support due to presumed downed bridges and telegraph lines to the north. Assuming that Wilder was cut off, Chalmers approached and demanded surrender, which was vehemently rejected. Wilder lost 37 casualties in the first day's events, while Chalmers over twice the amount. This put Chalmers committed to a siege approach in order to take the field. By the end of the fight, his brigade had suffered 288 casualties and scattered back to Cave City from whence he came. Colonel Wilder, a competent regimental commander, was commanding 3 regiments behind extensive fortifications. By day 2, Chalmers, after being rejected on surrender, found himself biting off more than he could chew. This move by Chalmers infuriated Braxton Bragg as it was unauthorized. Bragg had to make a decision: leave the station and bulwarks intact or force a general surrender. Chalmers had held back Wilder to a 2-day siege. Leaving it intact, he decided he would make Chalmers lose losses without meaning and purpose. This, he thought, would create poor esprit de corps with the troops. Choosing to deal with this 3-day delay, he marched his men 30-plus miles from start on the night of the 15th September to Munfordville. Upon arrival late on the 16th, Bragg made another choice. To prevent the killing of civilians in the area, Bragg sent out word requesting Wilder's surrender once again. Accompanied by Buckner, Wilder was led to the Confederate camp to see some 25,000 soldiers along with 45 cannons in tow. Wilder was easily convinced of the reality to come, and surrender was forthwith. The formal surrender took place the following day. Rather than taking control of 4,000 POWs, Bragg paroled the Union men who'd marched down to Munfordville in new uniforms. Supplies and stores were taken by Bragg in the engagement. One author, Kenneth Noe, N-O-E, noted in his book, Perryville, The Grand Havoc of Battle, and unless he, Bragg, intended to fight it out along the Green River, an idea that flickered only briefly under duress, Munfordville was a 3-day distraction the Confederate cause could ill afford. The incident is a good example of how Bragg had little overall vision for the campaign and instead simply reacted from event to event. Wilder would be taken prisoner after the surrender and spend 2 months in a POW camp before being exchanged. He would find later successes at Chickamauga and leadership roles at the Battle of Chattanooga and Atlanta campaigns. The southern attacks through Kentucky ended with the invasion of Perryville, which started on October 8th. The Confederates' Heartland Offensive essentially came to a close following the Perryville Battle. In support of this, Pam Brooks would like to speak about her great-great-grandfather who actually took a role in that. Pam, do you want to take it? History.
My great-great-grandfather, his name was George W. Busrow. He was born in 1825. Later on, we don't know who his father was. Legend has it that his father had gone off to hunt and never returned home, and left his widow and George and his sister as orphans. George, at the age of 7 years old, was bound out to a farmer to be apprenticed and learn a trade, learn how to farm.
So bounding is essentially child slave labor at that point.
Basically, some were treated good, some weren't. There were, the person who they were bound to was by law required to provide for the child clothes, food, housing, in return of getting to learn a trade. Many of them didn't learn that trade. Many of them were treated more like servants. Many of them, they were young. They could be anywhere from 7 years old or younger to 18. And it was usually bound for 7 years. With George, the family tradition tells us that he was treated very poorly and beaten, which would give reason for him to join on the Union side. His feelings towards slavery were quite strong. He, later on in 1856, married Letitia Willis. They had 2 children. Letitia was the daughter of a slave owner who later inherited a slave, but we believe she freed that slave upon inheriting.
Because there's no record of her going forward.
There is no record going forward of them having slaves. Then when the Civil War started, George, feeling so strongly about people being in bondage, he left a note on the flour barrel for his wife, left in the middle of the night on September 12th, and told her he had to go and enlist.
This would be a 12
with the Union Army.
This would be a 12-mile hike for him.
This was probably about a 14-mile hike for him to get to Munfordville, where he was going to enlist, where they were recruiting in Munfordville, and there were at least two companies that were recruited, and those 2 companies were assigned to the 33rd Kentucky Infantry.
This would be Company C and Company G.
Company C and Company G. Those companies were detached to Munfordville, and we believe they were detached to the 89th Indiana.
I mean, attached to the 89th?
Yes, attached to them. So George was there on the 14th when the battle started. He was assigned to picket duty because they had not been assigned any weapons yet. And he was on picket duty and got caught as the Confederates came in, got caught between Richard's sharpshooters and the stockade at Fort Craig
So this would also include the 10th Mississippi and the 44th Mississippi.
on the Confederate side.
We don't
yes.
know for sure which one got him, but they got him.
Well, one of them got him because they were captured along with, well, later surrendered. But he was out there with no weapons, you know, in the middle of all the crossfire. So it's kind of a miracle that I'm even here today.
Yeah, there but a stray bullet go you, right?
Exactly. So after the surrender, he was immediately paroled because the Confederates, they didn't want to have to take these prisoners along, nor did they have the resources to feed them
Or ship them back.
or ship them back. So they would a lot of times just parole them and tell them not to fight for the Union anymore.
Speaks a whole lot about Braxton Bragg's chivalry, because he could have just slaughtered 4,000
Right.
guys.
And George, he continued to fight in the war and went on to fight at the Battle of Nashville. And on to the end of the war, where he was mustered out from Company I of the 26th Infantry that had consolidated the 33rd.
Okay.
And that was in 1864 when they were consolidated. George was mustered out, I believe in April, right after the surrender of Lee's surrender.
And Appomattox.
Yes. And he was mustered out in Salisbury, North Carolina, so he did take part in some of Sherman's march.
Okay, that's the Eastern Shores.
Yes,
Or the
in
Atlantic
the
Crusade.
south,
Yeah.
through Georgia. But he lived till the end of the war, came home, and had several more children, and lived to the ripe old age, and died in 1911.
Same wife.
Same wife.
Don't change. So one of the things that occurred during the Civil War, I just want to bring this up just for a note, and it's this happened to John Brooks and his brother Bobby Brooks. They were captured. They fought for the South, and after their first battle, they were captured and sent to a POW camp in Indianapolis.
Mm-hmm.
Upon escaping there, it took them 2 weeks to get back to South Central Kentucky. At the time, there was a known process called Atonement, in which if two forces fought and the side that won lost more men than the side that lost, they would take some of the men from the side that lost and call them out and shoot them just to equal the number of losses.
Right.
John Brooks was captured and atoned in Meade County, just west of Louisville. I just thought that was an interesting point. I mean, if Bragg had shot 4,000 soldiers,
Mm-hmm.
especially unarmed soldiers, the atonement value of the South would have been extraordinary.
Pretty devastating at the time.
At the time, absolutely. Well, Pam, thank you for your time, and we'll close it off there. This signage was found just outside the Battle of Munfordville.